You're listening to episode number 18. But before we get into today's show, I just want to take a quick moment to recognize the passing of Aretha Franklin, also known as the Queen of Soul. See, hours before taping this episode, I learned, like you and so many people all over the world, that she passed away at the age of 76, succumbing to cancer. Most people listening today don't know this, but I love music. I was in concert band through much of junior high and high school, and if I could sing, I would definitely be interested in pursuing a singing career. And ever since I was a little girl, I always knew who Aretha Franklin was, why she was relevant, and what she meant to the music industry. Her presence, her soul, her talent, her record of accomplishments. She was unmatched, and as Rolling Stone magazine so rightfully named her, she was the greatest singer of our time. There was just no one like her. And as she passed today, and all the news stations played so many different iconic snapshots of performances of her life, I was reminded of just how much perseverance in life, not giving up and using our gifts and believing in oneself allows a person to go on to do great things. See, her story is inspiring and it represents a dream. Miss Aretha Franklin dealt with adversity early on in her life, from having children at the age of 12 and 14 years old to being a Black woman in America during the Civil Rights Movement. To reach the point of her life that she did and to be a part of interpreting songs that only she could have interpreted them in that way, it's just remarkable. It's special. Everybody who knows Aretha Franklin knows an Aretha Franklin song, and everybody can relate to at least one of those songs. So for the songs that have made people smile, to think, and to tolerate no disrespect, all hail to the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. May she rest in peace. Welcome to Overprescribed, the show that raises America's awareness on pharmaceutical medications in this country, all in an effort to help you, the everyday consumer, to live the safest, healthiest, and most informed medication experience possible. Hi, everybody. It's your host, Mika Pollack, and welcome to another episode of Overprescribed. I am looking at something that is really interesting, and I had to bring it to the show today and make it our main topic because I thought it was so monumental and it had a lot of implications for the future. So let's just dive right on in and talk about it. So it involves the state of New York. So New York did something last month that I believe only the state of Washington has attempted to do so far, and that is to sign into law something they're calling the Drug Take Back Act, which will become effective on January 6th of 2019. It's a substantial move for New York because if you look at the gross number of prescriptions written per state in 2017, I believe New York ranks in the top 3 easy, with over 280 million prescriptions written in that year alone. And I think only Texas and California, both at 317 million and 359 million respectively, came in higher. So put it this way, there are a lot of pills moving through the state of New York. And it's one of the main reasons why state lawmakers wanted to move in that direction, or even in this direction of this Drug Take Back Act, because with lots of pills comes lots of excess, and particularly when it relates to unused medications. The unused medications become a problem because they become safety hazards, for example, when left around the house, for potential access to kids, young children, and even for potential access for others to possibly abuse those drugs that are no longer needed for the patients the drugs were prescribed for in the first place. And these drugs definitely become a problem with regards to the environment. specifically when it comes to keeping water clean, particularly drinking water clean and free of medication contaminants that may show up in water due to people improperly disposing of their pills by simply flushing them down the toilet, something that, no one should ever do, and authorities all around the country advise not to do. So this drug take back program is very relevant for more than one public health issue. And the state of New York has decided that they are going to do something about it, something unprecedented. So can you imagine what the unprecedented part is? Well, the unprecedented part is that they are going to make drug companies or drug manufacturers pay for the whole thing. That's right. According to some of the details that have been released about this new Drug Take Back Act, I'm going to read it directly from this one article that I will post in the show notes. It reads, the act, which becomes effective January 6, 2019, the effective date imposes significant requirements on drug manufacturers, wholesalers, pharmacies, and what they're calling, in quotes, drug take-back organizations, and is intended to reduce medication misuse, save government and taxpayer money, and protect the state's water supplies by preventing drugs from being improperly disposed of by flushing or other means. This article goes on to state that the Act applies to all drug manufacturers as defined in the Act, who manufacture what they're calling covered drugs that are directly or through a wholesaler sold, offered for sale, or dispensed in the state to licensed in-state pharmacies that are part of a group or chain of 10 or more pharmacies that utilize the same name, are under common ownership or management, or are part of a franchise, as well as to registered out-of-state pharmacies that provide covered drugs to New York residents by mail, which the Act collectively refers to as pharmacies. So my interpretation of that is that this is probably most definitely going to impact some of the big box retail pharmacies, right? Like CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aids, all of those types of companies for sure are going to be impacted. Now, one thing that the Act also references is something I mentioned, and that's called covered drugs. So what's a covered drug? Well, according to the Act, covered drug means any drugs falling under the definition of drug as defined in the New York State law. And they make a reference of the specific code here of the law. And it includes drugs contained in medical devices. Now, not the medical devices themselves, but the drugs that may be in the medical devices. And it also applies to veterinary drugs. So drugs that you would buy for your dog or your cat. Now, the Act specifically excludes certain drugs or certain things, and it's very specific here, but it's kind of self-explanatory, but let me just read it. It excludes from the definition of covered drugs items such as vitamins, herbal remedies, cosmetics, various personal care items, household products, drugs utilized only in clinical settings, biologicals already subject to a manufacturer take-back program, and drugs already included in a take-back program as part of an FDA-managed risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. One thing I found interesting about the Act is its offering of options when it comes to drug manufacturers, wholesalers, pharmacies, and these so-called drug take-back organizations when it comes to how those entities should comply. So according to the Act, all of those entities will be able to comply in one of three methods. They can do one. The drug manufacturer can operate a New York State Department of Health approved drug take-back program, which I interpret this to mean drug manufacturers will say, fine, we'll take the lead on this, we'll get bodies on the ground and a hands-on program in place. They can also do a second option, which is a drug manufacturer can hire or contract with a drug take-back organization who will then, execute the program on behalf of the drug manufacturer. Or the third option, which I thought was a very clever option for New York State's benefit, would be the manufacturer can hire or pay the Department of Health to operate the program. Now, I'm not sure which option would be more attractive for the manufacturers. Maybe certain options would be more attractive than others. But no matter what the option is chosen, clearly the drug manufacturers are going to foot the bill. And wow, will they ever. The act is going to require drug manufacturers to pay for all operational and administrative costs for the program, which even includes costs incurred to enforce the law, and even for collection costs incurred by pharmacies, both freestanding and mail order pharmacies that will be selling medications to consumers within New York State border lines. Now, like most laws, there are timelines attached, and this Drug Take Back Act is no different. New York lawmakers are expecting for wholesalers who sell covered drugs in the state to give the state a list of manufacturers who produce covered drugs by the 30-day mark after the law becomes effective in early January of next year. State lawmakers are also expecting drug take-back organizations who have been contracted by drug manufacturers to submit a proposal to the Department of Health outlining minimum elements of how they plan to run these programs. Since those take-back or drug take-back organizations will have 180 days after the law's effective date, which is in early January, to submit their proposal, and the Department of Health will have up to 60 days to notify these organizations about the approval or rejection of those outlined program details. Let's just say it's probably going to take some time to see changes under the Drug Take Back Act, and folks should probably not expect to see any substantial changes until later next year at the earliest. If you're wondering, how will this impact consumers? Well, let me tell you. For one, consumers in New York may start to see drop-off points or collection boxes at their pharmacies. The logic seems to be to make this as easy as possible for New York consumers to participate and drop off those unused medications, which means saturating, as much as possibly feasible, these drug take-back locations all across the state. No longer will people need to rely on the sporadic drug take-back collection days that tend to appear through the year, but very sporadically in some parts of the state. Theoretically, if this program is implemented, well, then it means that everyone, or I would say at least 90% of the population, should be able to participate and all of the time. New York consumers will also be able to see, or should see, per the Act, very noticeable signs at participating pharmacies, noting their participation and how you can participate. As a matter of fact, that's a requirement within the Act for pharmacies to ensure that those notifications and signs are visible to consumers. And in the event the pharmacy doesn't have an actual physical drop-box location on site, then those pharmacies should be providing mail-back prepaid envelopes with vouchers. So what do you think about statewide drug take-back laws? Is this the future? How many more states will join New York and Washington? Are drug companies going to eventually push back or try to negotiate? If the program becomes a bit too intensive for drug companies or drug manufacturers to participate in? And when it comes to the lack of compliance, will the fines, because there's specific fines noted in the Act or in the law, will those fines be implemented swiftly and thoroughly collected? And probably the biggest question that I have is, will these programs be ultimately effective? I mean, because no matter how you look at it, the potential for it to be incredibly important and impactful for public health is there. But this act or this law relies on consumer participation. And whenever you have an improvement process that relies on consumers to participate, when you can't force them to participate, well, let's just say problems can ensue. Problems like major program failure, lost dollars, lost effort. Regardless of what is to come, it's a huge move for a big state player in the medication market like New York. And I'm sure all eyes will be watching and waiting and expecting for major positive outcomes that will improve patient health and protect the environment as a direct result of this new law.